Welcome to Podcast 83, a regular look at the news, stories, and trends related to Michigan's 83 counties from the Michigan Association of Counties.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Podcast 83, the podcast put on by the Michigan Association of Counties. Today, we are joined by our wonderful government affairs team, Deena, Bosworth, Samantha Gibson, Madeline, Fata. We had a somewhat busy week last week, not necessarily getting items off the floor as we talked about in last week's podcast, but still a lot of committee work getting done. So Deena, let's talk a little bit. Let's kick it off a little bit talking about some testimony you did. Was it tax policy or local government committee, I believe, on an unfunded mandate package or unfunded mandate bills that we've seen a few times now. Testimony was last week. Can you give us a little update on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was, it's House Bill 5353, if anybody's interested in looking at it. Representative John Fitzgerald from Kent County introduced it. It's basically identical to what Senator McBroom has been introducing each and every legislative term. Pretty good. I gave testimony in front of the House Local Government Committee, so a lot of heads nodding, a lot of questions about how much money this is actually going to cost the state. But this bill is prospective only. So much like the other ones in the past, it requires the fiscal agencies to identify if there's any potentially new mandates in legislation for local units of government or an expansion of mandates for local units of government. And if there is, then they have to do a fiscal note. You know, they say that they do it now a little bit where they talk about the financial impact to local units of government, but most of those pieces of legislation say it's indeterminate fiscal impact, and there's no real numbers behind it. So the legislature really has no idea. So this fiscal note process laid out in these bills would require them to really dig in and figure out how much some new mandate is going to cost. And then the legislature would be responsible for appropriating that money out. And if it doesn't happen, if they don't do the fiscal note before third reading in the House, they're in the chamber that it originated in, or or they don't appropriate the money, then we don't have to comply.
Yeah, so it's like I said, we've seen the iterations of this bill in the past. Is there anything different in this bill that would kind of help it or hurt it or anything? As we obviously haven't seen much action in the past. Or
No, I think the challenge is, Steve, is that the fiscal agencies don't know how they're going to gather this information, where they're really going to get all of these dollars from, a really good estimate that they can use. So I think that that's probably the biggest concern. Now, the bill does call for the Department of Treasury to create a database and store certain types of information that may help them in the development of their fiscal estimate. So we'll see. We'll see if it goes forward. I will say though, everyone understands that unfunded mandates are not okay. And we've been, hugely successful in recent years ensuring that new mandates are paid for by the legislature. But I think, members are nervous as to what that price tag really might be.
yeah, I get it, but I like the idea of a database too, because theoretically, as more and more of these are done, that database gets further and further developed, which makes it easier and easier as you can reference that database to kind of figure out costs over time. So, well, hopefully we'll see some movement on that. Any idea when there may be a committee vote or anything like that at this point? Okay.
No, I don't think that that's been quite determined yet.
Okay. All right, moving along, some more testimony we had last week has to do with the trial court funding bills. Of course, something we've talked about a few times, numerous times on this podcast. We've worked on since the last sunset was pushed out on trying to get either trial court funding recommendations implemented, or as we get closer to the sunset date, trying to get bill passed to extend the sunset date so those recommendations can get implemented. So, Sam, why don't you tell our folks about what happened last week and what we're looking at here over the next month and a half?
So quite a bit has unfolded in the world of trial court funding reform over the last week. Last Wednesday, I testified in the House Judiciary Committee in support of two bills. One is sponsored by Representative Leitner, and that extends the quickly approaching May 1 sunset date out to December 31st, 2026 on fee authority for fines and fees collected by local courts from criminal defendants. And then the other bill that Max supports is sponsored by Representative Breen, and that's a plan for a plan, if you will, that requires the state court administrator's office to do data collection on court costs, revenue, judicial caseload, and a few other things to then give a report to legislators in May of 2026 so that they can make informed policy decisions when implementing the Trial Court Funding Commission recommendations.
Right, so you've got funding extension essentially here. You've got a plan for the plan here. So now they're both in committee. What are we hearing? They're up for they're on the committee agenda for this week. What do we expect to happen this week now?
So yes, they're on the committee agenda for this week, Wednesday morning. I do anticipate a vote rather, since they've been posted for again. The problem we're running into is political dynamics in the House. As we all know, there's an even split. So the Dems have a majority on committees, so there will be no problem getting these bills out of committee. But when they reach the floor for a vote, there's some issues coming up there, which leads us to May 1, more than likely arriving, and the extension bill not yet being signed.
Right, so the tie bar gets attached in committee tomorrow. It goes to the House floor. Schedule wise, we're expecting a week of voting, or 2 weeks of voting technically this week, next week, 2 weeks of spring break or so. And then we're into, the second week of April, then we only have 3 weeks. If due to rules, right, if it's a first House or a first chamber bill, House bills, got to get to the Senate, sit 5 days, and then you can technically take action on those bills. So unless we still see action, we have that time frame shrinks considerably, correct? What are our so we don't think it's going to get out of the House? Is there a shot it gets out of the House? Just don't know yet. What are we thinking?
So as far as timeline goes, you're exactly right, Steve. Not only is this extremely time sensitive, but we also have a very limited number of days for the legislature to vote this out and send it to the governor's desk. Now, unless for some reason the two caucuses in the House come to an agreement and these bills remain tie barred and get sent over to the Senate before spring break, maybe immediately after, which is 2 weeks off coming up pretty soon here, that the legislature won't be voting at all, which I think is becoming increasingly unlikely. I think the more likely outcome is mid-April, there's an election to fill 2 vacant House seats. Best case scenario, those seats are filled the following week, so week of April 22nd. The House can pass these 2 bills at that time, send them over to the Senate. If we could skip a committee hearing, send it right to the Senate floor and get it to the governor's desk maybe a week or so after May 1st. The fee authority is reinstated and the sunset gets once again kicked out to 2026. Now, that gap in time between May 1 and whenever this gets signed, if it comes to that, will lead to a funding gap. Now, it's Mac's position that if the legislature withholds these bills and a funding gap occurs, that the state is responsible for backfilling those funding and allocating that to local courts, which we saw back in October of 2022.
Yeah, so we've been down that road before. It did work out that way, which is great. No guarantee it could work out this way, but obviously the precedent is set. But just to kind of take a step back, there's still an opportunity to get the sunset extended prior to the existing sunset date. I think it's a good time to remind our folks that, calling your House members, encouraging them to vote on this, because of the impact it could have on the court system locally, it's a great time to do that. Are we going to do a P2A campaign in the next couple weeks, you think, to kind of remind folks?
Yes, there will be a P2A really soon here, especially once we know when the bills will be on the House floor. But yes, highly encourage you all to contact your House reps, let them know what you stand to lose, what the courts in their district and your counties will be facing. If you know how much, even better. I mean, statewide, annually, we're looking at $50 million in court funding lost. Now, if it's a few weeks, obviously it's significantly less than 50 million, but still a substantial price tag, and one that we don't want counties to backfill.
Right. Yeah. So just a reminder, phone to action, P2A is our phone to action campaign. That's the email software we use to send out to everyone. But of course, if you have your state reps' personal cell phone numbers, that goes a long way as well. Or if you see them doing, if they're back in district over this spring break, great time to grab them, explain to them the issue. That those personal connections are always very important. Well, thanks for that update, Samantha. Moving on, Madeline. Last week we also had perspective, I guess, or was it a meeting, a hearing, or kind of a town hall from the Michigan Public Service Commission on solar siting? What was it?
I would call it a town hall. They're kind of calling it a public meeting. It was a virtual meeting. The Public Service Commission hosted it. A lot of their staff was on the call. And then they gave an opportunity to Judy Allen from the Township Association, Dr. Sarah Mills, who's a planning expert from U of M, and Catherine Kaufman, who's a municipal attorney. The three of them gave a presentation together of kind of their laundry list of concerns with implementing this legislation. It was a really eye-opening meeting. I've heard a lot of it before in these previous meetings, but it was an opportunity for the PSC to hear it, and the public was welcome on the call. I think there were about 250 people on the call in total. So I think it was a really great learning opportunity for everyone. Certainly a lot of red flags were raised, but they're not done. There's another meeting on March 19th at 1:30. There's a virtual link available online. We can share that with everybody. I think it's great for members to participate on those. They're also accepting public comment between now and March 25th. So there's an opportunity to share in writing some of your concerns on this new solar siting legislation.
So public comments, great. Obviously we think our members should be in there voicing any concerns, but I mean, is there still confusion on what can and can't be done? Is that what they're trying to figure out? Or, I mean, I guess it is statute. So the public comment's great, but statutes, right? So are we talking interpretation? Is that what we're working on here? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the law is the law, but there are just a lot of open-ended clauses in this law, I would say. For example, the language says each affected local unit of government must have a compatible renewable energy ordinance. So does that mean the township and the county each have to have an ordinance? Because legally they can't have conflicting ordinances. So one's going to have to adopt a zoning ordinance while the other's going to have to adopt a police power ordinance. Do they have to look identical? It's confusing as all get out. And the PSC was not there really to answer questions during this meeting, just to, be on the lookout for some answers down the road, I think.
And of course, just to remind everyone, this is the issue of local zoning, really, is what it comes down to, and the removal of that from local control, whether it's a township or the 20 counties that we have out there doing some sort of county zoning. Obviously, something we're opposed to whenever you remove local control. We work very closely with our folks, other local units of government associations, Michigan Township Association, MML, us, obviously focused on the zoning side specifically. We have decided to join. Our MAC board voted to join Citizens for Local Choice, which is the ballot initiative group that is working to get the removal of local control, specifically from this piece of legislation on the 2024 ballot. We've joined MTA and farm bureaus and a bunch of other grassroots folks on that. So be seeing more information from us on that in the next few weeks. But that group has spoken to a bunch of our committees and has gotten feedback from our commissioners prior to us joining that group. But the MAC board did make that decision about a week or so ago. So again, local control issues where we're focused on this, and when anytime local control is being stepped on, we're going to be concerned. And I think this is a great opportunity for our members to show that. So I guess stay tuned on the MPSC recommendations. And if you have an opportunity to get on that call, then we'll make sure to get that information out. That would be great. So that's all I had on my list this week. Did I miss anything? All right, great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll be back next week.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Podcast 83.